Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. So today I just wanted to talk about the books that I read in February because February was actually a fantastic reading month, quantity-wise. Now that's not to say that the quality of the books that I read in February were not good, it's just that in January I felt like I read so little, and in February I far exceeded my TBR goal. So without further ado, let's talk about all of the books that I read in February. Alright, so I have a bit of a dilemma in sharing this picture book with you. I read The Strange Birds of Flannery O'Connor, which is a picture book biography of Flannery O'Connor, and it wasn't a very long book. It was definitely a children's biography. So I did really like this book, and I kind of decided that I was going to include it in my Goodreads challenge because last year there were a few shorter children's books that I included, such as Flat Stanley or Fantastic Mr. Fox. And there's also the fact that I read a lot of Wings of Fire books, and those are middle grade. So including a picture book biography didn't feel so out of the realm of normal. And then next I finished Flowers of Mold by Ha Seung-nan. This is a book that I started months ago and got about half to 3/4 of the way through and then just stopped reading it. And I thought that was just because I had other stuff to read, but in reality when I came back to this, I just didn't enjoy it as much. I gave this 3 stars, and it is basically a short story collection about a bunch of different people in very unnerving and unsettling situations, but they're very subtly unnerving. There's not something glaring going on usually. It's just very strange and eerie. And I thought that I would really like that. This is also a Korean translated book, and I just thought that I would love this because it had all of the sort of boxes checked that I enjoy in books. But it didn't come together in the way that I expected, and I just didn't love it. So I don't have a ton to say about this one, but I really just finished the last couple of stories in February, so I'm including it in my February wrap-up, but it's not all that exciting. There are definitely stories in this collection that I really, really liked, but overall, it just didn't come together for me. That's all I have to say about it, really. Alright, next up, I read a book on audio, and that was Word Slut, A Feminist Guide to Taking Back the English Language by Amanda Montell. So in November, I read Cultish by Amanda Montell and gave it 5 stars. I thought her nonfiction writing style was absolutely incredible. It was captivating, it was interesting, it wasn't dry or boring ever. And the topic of cults was so fascinating to me that it just made it such a wonderful reading experience. And I was looking up Amanda Montell's other books because I loved her style, and I found Word Slut, which I think is her only other published book. But that one basically talks about how gendered the English language is and how language has become such a big part of how we define and understand gender. I found this book to be absolutely fascinating. I got really hooked on listening to it. I just thought that it was very informative and very fun to read. And if the topic of feminism interests you, this is a fantastic book to read. So I gave this one 4 stars. It definitely wasn't an all-time favorite, nor did it live up to Cultish entirely, but it was very informative and very interesting and definitely worth the read. Next up, I read Rest and Be Thankful by Emma Glass. This one was a book that I got recently and wanted to pick up immediately because it just sounded very interesting. This is about a nurse named Laura on a pediatric unit who is super burnt out and is really struggling and starts sort of seeing things that aren't there. She's really just trying to keep up with all the things going on in her life and deal with sort of things falling apart as well. Her husband doesn't want to be with her anymore, and her job has become so taxing. So it's a very unique book in that the way that the story is told is very confusing and sort of fever dreamish in a way. You feel like you are also hallucinating when you read these because you don't know what exactly is going on. You can definitely tell when she's dreaming or hallucinating versus her real life, but it starts to kind of blend together. And I just found it to be a very unique and interesting book, especially because I've read so many books in this sort of sad girl or struggling woman kind of genre. I thought the writing was really good. It was very interesting. And overall, I gave this one 4 stars. It wasn't a favorite, but it was definitely worth the read. And I'll definitely be rereading it at some point. I really, really enjoyed it. So moving right along, we have Tender by Ariana Horowitz. I have talked about this one before, but this is the 3rd book in Ariana Horowitz's sort of translated trilogy published by Charcoal Press, which all kind of deal with women who are struggling or women who are unlikable, and they all sort of revolve around the context of motherhood in different ways. So this one focuses on a relationship between a mother and her son and the toxicity in that relationship and some kind of weird stuff going on that isn't super clear. Unfortunately, this book was a little too far in the direction of confusing for me. I really like Ariana Horowitz's style most of the time. Die My Love was confusing at times and you really had to sit down and figure out what was going on as you read it, but this book just was so extreme in the difficulties understanding what was going on. Maybe it's just me. If you've read this, please let me know if you felt like it was very confusing, but I didn't feel like there was any sort of linear plot. There wasn't even a ton of focus on the characters individually. The writing is beautiful. There's a lot of great descriptions and it definitely has that very fever dreamy quality to it. And you can definitely start to see some like really intense themes coming through. But I don't think that it hit me as hard as it could have if I understood more of what was happening. So like I said, that's probably just on me, but honestly, her other 2 books were a lot easier for me to understand, and this one was just challenging for me, so maybe if I reread it at some point, I'll get more out of it. But for now, I gave this one 3 stars. Still really glad I read it because I wanted to complete the trilogy, but not a favorite. Next, we have a book that I promised I was going to read this year, and I already got it read, which is very exciting, and that is Everybody in This Room Will Someday Be Dead by Emily Austen. So this has made its rounds all over BookTube and Bookstagram, so I'm sure you know somewhat about it, but it's about a young woman who feels like she's kind of lost purpose in her life, and she's really struggling with some mental illness, and she goes to this church thinking that she's going to be getting counseling, and she actually gets roped into being the secretary for this Catholic church. And she's also a lesbian, so that kind of is a bit of a conflict. So I had said I was going to read this because this is just a book that I was totally going to read for fun. It wasn't for any particular project or reason. And I ended up listening to the audiobook, which was pretty fun, but it wasn't a standout book to me. I did really enjoy listening to it. And this is my dilemma. Often when I listen to books, I have a hard time connecting to the books as much as when I physically read them. That's not always the case. There are definitely some books that I prefer on audio, but a lot of just regular fiction books, I struggle to connect with the book as much. And I don't know if that's what happened here, or maybe I just had very high expectations for this book and they just fell short. That's not to say that I didn't like the book. I gave it 4 stars. I really enjoyed listening to the audiobook. I thought the concept was very interesting. I liked the sort of dramatic difference between her real life and her church life. I thought it was very well done. But I didn't have this emotional attachment to it that I expected I would. So that's a little bit disappointing, but ultimately it was well written, I enjoyed it, and it was a fun and interesting read overall. All right, the second to last book is the only book that I said I was going to read in February, and that is The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. So I'm not gonna go into it fully because I did film a reading vlog, so I talk a lot about the book in that, but overall, I felt like it was a very fun book to listen to, especially because I was just in Kansas and I was alone in my fiance's apartment, and I just had some time to enjoy listening to something that he liked. But even he had some complaints about the book, and both of us kind of felt like it was like a 3 or a 3.5. So it was a good book overall, but we felt like the ending was kind of lacking. I felt like the magic system wasn't developed as much as I would like, and Overall, I just think that there could have been so much more done with the book or big sections taken out. I almost feel like if the author had replaced a lot of the sort of extraneous plot lines with more discussion of how the magic system works, we would have a more complete feeling book. And that's just me personally. I don't read a lot of fantasy, so I don't know what the metric for fantasy is. But to me, I just felt like the ending was so anticlimactic for the 800-page buildup, and if we had had less pages and less extraneous stuff, maybe the ending would have been more impactful. I don't know. And then the last book that I read in February was Erotic Stories for Punjabi Widows by Bali Kaur Jaswal. So this was a book that I read for a book club at my job, and we haven't had the book club yet, so I don't know what the discussion is going to be like, but I'm very excited to talk about this book because it was so much fun. It had a little bit of everything. It was all at once kind of spicy and sweet and thrilling and twisty, and it was just everything you could want in a book. This book follows a woman named Nikki who is really lost in life, and she goes to the community center in her little Punjabi community in London, and she finds an ad to teach writing classes, and she thinks that they are creative writing classes, like storytelling classes. But the woman who posts the ad couldn't really read all of the information on the ad, and she really just wanted someone to come teach the Punjabi widows English. So there was a bit of a wires crossed kind of situation happening, and the women end up writing erotic stories instead of learning English. So it is a hilarious book. The way that they talk about sex is so funny, and I just felt like it was a very empowering book as well. We got to see how different women are empowered by showing or not showing their sexuality. I just found it to be an incredible book and so much fun and really unexpected. Like, I wasn't sure that this was going to be a 5-star book, but it ended up being my favorite book that I read in February. So I got it on audio, and I ended up wanting to have a physical copy because I do want to reread this because I loved it so much. I'm a little out of breath from all of that rambling, but I really, really liked this book, and it was my favorite book of February. So those are all of the books that I read in February. I had a really, really great reading month. I read way more than I expected to. Honestly, I just expected to read the one book, which was The Priory of the Orange Tree. So I am so thrilled with how many books I ended up reading. Did you guys have a good reading month? I would love to hear about your reading month and your favorite and least favorite book of February. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.